Now, why it is necessary for the classification of overheads? First is of course effective cost control, because if I want to implement a cost control system, I must have some knowledge about the nature, about the behavior of the cost. So, for that purpose, for the effective cost control, we need the classification of overheads. It is of course, if I know that the cost behavior and all, it will be helpful in the decision making process. And also I should know all the cost for fixation of the selling price. So, if I go for say I should fix the selling price at some point where I should have some profit margin. So, for that it is required. Marginal costing and cost volume analysis. So, here I need to divide the overhead cost on the basis of its behavior, that is whether it is fixed or variable. We will discuss the concepts of marginal costing and cost volume analysis, profit analysis later on. It is helpful for budgetary control also, and last is that for the absorption of the overheads, as we already discussed, that for calculation of the unit cost, right, I need to absorb the overheads under the appropriate cost units. So, for that I need to classify the overheads. The effective cost control is very important. To exercise the effective cost control, proper classification of overhead into fixed and variable is required. Fixed expenses are incurred by management decision and as such can be controlled by top management, while variable expenses can be controlled by lower management. Usually the fixed what will be the proportion of the fixed expense or the and the variable expense, that is what is the proportion of operating leverage, that is a part of higher management decision. So, that needs to be done. Helpful in decision making, the classification of fixed or variable overheads helps in taking the following decisions by management: make or buy decision, selection of suitable sales mix, operate or shut down decisions, right. So, for this type of decisions, we need to segregate the fixed cost and the variable cost. Fixation of selling price, the classification of overheads into fixed and variable is very helpful in determining the selling price of the products or services. Sometimes a manufacturer charges different prices for the same articles in different markets to meet varying degrees of competition. However, the lowest selling price of any product should at least cover prime cost plus variable overhead. This classification also helps in determining the price during trade depression or in a special market. So, for fixation of selling price also, the classification of overhead is very helpful. Marginal costing and cost volume analysis, the classification of fixed or variable overhead elements is very essential for the technique of marginal costing and break-even analysis. We will discuss the techniques of marginal costing and break-even analysis in much more detail in subsequent modules. It helps in ascertaining the marginal cost, that is the total variable cost attributable to one unit of output. Further, it assists in determining the break-even point, that is the volume of output where there is no profit and no loss. Helpful in budgetary control, classification of fixed or variable overhead is very helpful in preparation of flexible budgets. A flexible budget is a budget which is designed to change in accordance with the level of activity actually attained. The flexible budget for various levels of activity can be prepared with the help of this classification. Absorption of overhead. Now, once this classification is done, then we need to absorb the overheads. Now, this classification helps in proper absorption of different items of overhead. This method to be adopted for determining the absorption rates depends on the nature of overhead. Now, if it is absorbed, it is fine, otherwise we need to allocate. Most of the manufacturing process functionally are different and performed by different departments in a factory. Where such a division of functions has been made, some of the departments would be engaged in actual production of goods, while others in providing services ancillary thereto. For the efficient working, a factory is divided into a number of subdivisions. Such subdivisions are referred to as departments. In other words, departmentalization of overhead means dividing the factory into several segments called departments or cost centers to which expenses are charged. This subdivision is done in such a manner so that each department represents a division of activity of the organization, such as repairs department, power department, tools department, stores department, etc. Right? The following factors are taken care of while dividing the organization into number of departments. So, there are certain factors which we need to take care of, we need to consider while doing the departmentalization. So, every manufacturing process is divided into its natural divisions in order to maintain natural flow of raw materials from the time of its purchase till its conversion into finished goods and sale. The sequence of operations are taken into consideration while determining the while determining the location of various departments. And number 3, division of responsibility as far as possible should be clear without ambiguity and dual control. Now, it includes a large number of types of indirect costs. So, direct costs are identifiable to cost units, and overheads, which are often considerable, cannot be related directly to cost units, as we said earlier. So, there is a two-stage method to allocate overhead to products, right? So, we will discuss how to allocate. Overheads are assigned to cost centers such as departments. An allocation base is selected for allocating production center expenses to products. So, what is the procedure of overhead allocation to product? Assign all factory overheads to cost centers, reallocate service center overheads to production cost centers, calculate separate overhead absorption rate for each cost center, assign cost center overhead to products. So, it contains two parts, one is cost allocation and second one is cost apportionment. So, what is cost allocation? Where a cost can be clearly identified with a cost center or cost unit, then it can be allocated to that cost center or cost unit. Cost apportionment, it is not possible to identify a discrete item of cost with a cost center, and it is necessary to split a cost over several cost centers on some agreed basis, right? So, what are the basis of apportionment? The apportionment of indirect expenses to cost centers must be made on fair and reasonable basis. Different types of expense require different bases according to their individual characteristics. So, reallocation service center overheads to now you allocated the overheads over the production centers as well as service centers. Now, the overhead portion of overhead which is allocated to the service centers, you may need to reallocate it to the production centers to find out the cost per unit, right? So, why we should do this? Because service centers are not directly involved in production, they only support service to other production departments in order to facilitate the production process. Therefore, it is necessary to reallocate the service center overheads to production departments so that all production costs can be absorbed into production. So, calculate separate overhead absorption rate for each cost center. To determine the overheads to be absorbed by a cost center, it is necessary to establish an overhead absorption rate. So, overhead absorption rate is equal to total overhead of cost center divided by total number of units of absorption base applicable to cost center. So, this final step is to charge the overheads to the products passing through the production departments. So, final step, once these overheads are allocated to production departments as well as the service department, then you can reapportion the overhead service department overheads to production departments, and according to the, so to find out the unit cost, right? Now, what are the types of departmentalization, right? The departments in a factory can be broadly categorized into following types. So, when you are allocating and apportioning and reapportioning, you need to departmentalize. You need to find out that which departments are the cost centers where you can allocate the overheads, right? So, what are the types? First type is, of course, producing or manufacturing departments. A manufacturing or producing department is one in which manual or machine operations and other process of production of articles and commodities take place. The number of such departments will depend upon the nature of industry, the type of work performed and the size of the factory. Then there are some other departments like administrative department and all. They are not directly engaged into production, but they give a special type of service for the sustainability of the production department. So, these are called the service departments, right. So, partly producing departments, so there may be some departments, right, which partly producing and partly service, right. In every organization, a few departments such that it is not possible to place these departments into particular category since they fall within the purview of both categories, producing and service departments. For example, if a tool room manufactures some special tools for utilization in the main job orders, it is acting as a productive department, though basically it is a service department. What are the advantages of departmentalization? Right, there are several advantages. First is it segregates factory overhead costs and computes the total cost of each service departments. It makes possible the establishment of control to keep costs at a minimum. Number 3, ascertainment of cost of different departments helps in computing the cost of different jobs or products which pass through these departments. And 4, after having collected the overheads under proper standing order numbers, the next step is to arrive at the amount of each department or the cost center. So, for proper allocation and absorption of overheads, departmentalization is important, it is necessary. This may be enough allocation or absorption. According to Chartered Institute of Management Accountants, London, cost allocation is that part of cost attribution which charges a specific cost. It is important, which that part of cost attribution which charges a specific cost to the cost center or cost unit. Thus, the wages paid to maintenance workers as obtained from wage analysis book can be allocated directly to maintenance service cost center. So, if maintenance service is a cost center, you can directly allocate it. Similarly, indirect material cost can also be allocated to different cost centers according to use by pricing stores requisitions. Apportionment of overheads. Apportionment refers to the distribution of overheads among departments or cost centers on an equitable basis. In other words, apportionment involves charging the share of the overheads to a cost center or cost unit. SEMA London has defined it as that part of cost attribution which shares cost among two or more cost centers or cost units in proportion to the estimated benefit received using a proxy. Apportionment is done in case of those overhead items which cannot be wholly allocated to a particular department. For example, the salary paid to the works manager of the factory, factory rent, general manager's salary, etc. cannot be charged wholly to a particular department or cost center, but will have to be charged to all departments or cost centers on an equitable basis. So, these are the examples of overhead. Reapportionment of overheads. Normally, products do not pass through service departments, but service departments do benefit the manufacture of products. Therefore, it is logical that product cost should bear an equitable share of the cost of service departments. The process of redistribution of the cost of service departments among the production departments is known as secondary distribution. So, you can allocate into production departments and then service departments the overhead, and then the portion which now you allocated to service departments, that you can further reapportion or redistribute, right. So, what is the criteria for secondary distribution? So, first is service or use method. Under this method, overheads are distributed over various production departments on the basis of service received. The greater is the amount of service received by a production department, the greater should be the share to be apportioned to that department. This criteria has greatest applicability in cases where overhead costs can be easily and directly traced to departments receiving the benefits. Since this method is based upon the extent of the benefit received by a department, the expenses are equitably apportioned. This method is considered to be fair as it takes into account the time element and consistent results. Analysis or survey, this is another method. In certain cases, it may not be possible to measure exactly the extent of benefit which the various departments receive, as this may vary from period to period. Therefore, overheads are apportioned on the basis of analysis and survey of existing conditions. This basis of apportionment includes arbitrary elements. Ability to pay, this method presumes that higher the revenue of the production department, higher should be the proportionate charge for services. This method is simple to apply, but it is generally considered inequitable because it penalizes the efficient and profitable units of a business to the advantage of the inefficient ones. Efficiency or incentive method, this is another method for apportionment of service department overheads. This basis facilitates scientific distribution of service department cost to production departments. Under this method, the apportionment of expenses is made on the basis of production targets. If the target is exceeded, the unit cost reduces, indicating a more than average efficiency. Opposite is the effect if the assumed levels are not reached. Thus, the department whose sales are increasing is able to show a greater profit and thereby is able to earn greater goodwill and appreciation of management. General use of indices, this is another method. If data relating to actual services rendered cannot be obtained in some situations, this method is adopted. The index selected is closely related to assured flow of service department cost to production departments. For instance, the service of cost accounting department can be apportioned to production departments on the basis of number of employees in each department. So, here are some examples, right? Like maintenance department, for example, it can be the basis of apportionment can be hours worked for each department. For employment or personal department, that is HR, the basis of apportionment could be rate of labor turnover or number of employees in each department. Payroll or time department, the basis of apportionment could be direct labor hours, machine hours, number of employees, etc. Stores keeping department, number of requisitions, quantity or value of materials. Welfare department, the basis of apportionment could be number of employees in each department. Internal transport service, the basis of apportionment could be truck hours, truck mileage or tonnage. And building service department, the basis of apportionment could be relative area of each department. And powerhouse, for powerhouse it could be floor area and cubic contents. Now, once you apportioned it, right? So, for the part which is which belongs to service departments, you can reapportion it. So, at first expenses of all departments are compiled without making a distinction between production and service departments. but then the expenses of the service departments are apportioned among the production departments on a suitable basis. It is also possible that expenses of one service department may also be apportioned in part to another service department to arrive at the total expenses incurred on the latter department, which will then be distributed among production department. So, direct distribution method, right, for apportioning. Under this method, the cost of service department are directly apportioned to production departments without taking into consideration any service from one service department to another service department. So, this is a simpler way, right. So, step method, in this method what happens, the cost of most serviceable department is first apportioned to other service departments and production departments. The next service department is taken up and its cost is apportioned, and this process is going on till the cost of last service department is apportioned. The cost of last service department is apportioned among production departments only. Reciprocal service method is another method. This method gives cognizance to the fact that where there are two or more service departments, they may render service to each other, and therefore these inter-department services are to be given due weight in distributing the expenses of service departments. Simultaneous equation method. Under this method, the true cost of service departments are ascertained first with the help of simultaneous equations. These are then distributed among production departments on the basis of given percentages. Repeated distribution method. According to this method, service department costs are apportioned over other departments, production as well as service according to the agreed percentages. This process is repeated until total cost of the service departments are exhausted or the figures become too small to be considered for further apportionment. Trial and error method. In this method, the cost of one service department is apportioned to another service department. The cost of another service department plus share received from the first service department is again apportioned to first service department, and this process is continued until the balancing figure becomes nil. Trial and error method. For instance, suppose there are two service departments X and Y. These service departments render service to each other. Cost of service department X will be distributed to service department Y. Again, cost of service department Y plus the share of service department X will be apportioned to X. The amount so apportioned to X will continue to be repeated till the amount involved becomes negligible. So, this is the trial and error method. Now, absorption of overheads. What is the meaning? Cost absorption means allotment of overheads to jobs, right? In other words, till now we were allocating it to the departments, now we are absorbing it to the jobs. In other words, distribution of overhead expenses to a particular department over the units produced in that department is called absorption. So, absorption, there are several methods like percentage of direct material method, right, percentage of prime cost, percentage of direct labor cost, right, labor hour rate and machine hour rate. These are the traditional ways of absorbing the overheads. So, percentage of first is percentage of direct material. So, what is the meaning? This rate is obtained by dividing the amount of overheads by the direct material cost and expressing it as a percentage. So, the formula is this: factory overhead by direct material into 100. So, where it is suitable, where there is only one kind of article is produced, prices of material are stable, right, it should be stable, and it forms a material cost forms a very high percentage of the total cost. That means, if the material cost changes, the overall cost will also change and overhead should also change. What are the merits and demerits of percentage of direct material method? The following are the merits. It is simple. Of course, it is very simple to calculate and very easy to operate. And there are certain demerits, right? Does not take into account the time factor. Does not take into account the time factor, and no distinction is made between fixed and variable expenses. So these are the two demerits. Then percentage of direct labor cost, this is particularly suitable where the production process, the labor cost is a important component, right? The rate is obtained by dividing the amount of overheads by direct wages cost, and the formula is this, right? Now, what are the where it is suitable? Where the rates are uniform, right? And the ratio of skilled and unskilled labor is constant and it forms a greater part. So, where the manufacturing process is labor oriented, right? In such a case, this method is very suitable. Merits and demerits, what are the merits? It is simple. It is very simple, right? Easy to calculate, right? It takes into the time factor because wages are usually paid on the basis of time. It is a stable method, right? Because labor rates are usually, it doesn't fluctuate like material, for example. And what are the disadvantages? If price rate system is adopted, the time factor is completely ignored. No distinction is made between the production of hand workers and that of machine workers. No distinction is made between fixed and variable. So, these are the disadvantages. Percentage of prime cost method, this rate is obtaining by dividing the amount of overhead by prime cost, right? And the formula is what? Factory overhead by prime cost into 100. Where it is suitable, where the wages are uniform, where the skilled and unskilled labor is constant, the ratio, direct labor forms a greater part of the total cost. Percentage of labor hour method, this is a rate obtained by dividing the amount of overhead by labor hours. So, this is the formula, right? This is suitable when the most of the work is being done manually. What are the merits and demerits of direct labor hour method? So, merits are this: the time factor is taken into consideration. It is easy as labor hours are really available from timesheets, job cards, etc. And demerit is it cannot be used where machines are used extensively for production. It does not take into consideration the expenses which are not dependent on labor hours, such as insurance, depreciation, power extension, etc. Percentage of machine hour method, this is another method. It is obtained by dividing the amount of overheads by machine hours. This is the formula, factory overhead by machine hours. It is suitable where the work is predominantly machine based. So, where it is labor based, we can use the labor hours method, and where it is machine based, we can use the machine hour method. What are the merits and demerits of machine hour method? It is a scientific method of recovering overheads. It helps to compare the relative efficiencies and cost of operating different machines. It brings to light the existence and extent of idle time of machines. And what are the demerits? It involves more clerical work and it is costly. It does not take into account the expenses that are not dependent on the working hours of machines. It does not give accurate result if manual labor is equally important. So, here is one illustration. You see, the P Limited is a manufacturing company having 3 production departments and 2 service departments. See, these are the production departments A, B and C, and D and E are the service departments. Here the particular is given rent and rates, general lighting, indirect wages, power, depreciation and sundry expenses, right? These are the expenses incurred. So, now there is additional information. So, it is in area, right, and the value of machinery for all the 5 departments are given: light points, direct wages, horsepower of machines, and working hours, right? Now, the expenses of D and E are to be allocated, right? So you see D can be allocated between A, B, C, D and E, right? And E is also allocated like that, right? You are required to do the following: a statement showing the distribution of overheads, a statement showing redistribution of service department cost to production department, compute overhead recovery rate, and ascertain total cost of article if material cost is 50, labor cost is 30, and it passes through departments A, B and C for 4, 5 and 3 hours respectively. So, we can do it like this, right? We can distribute the overhead. So, for example, for rent and rates, right, the basis of apportionment can be the floor space, right? Now, total amount is how much? Rent and rates, it is 5,000. If we go here, you see what is the amount of rate center? This is 5,000, right? And rent, this we are, here the area is given, right, in square meter. Now, 5,000 if you distribute, right, right, on the basis of floor space, you should get these values, right? 1,000 for A, 1,250 for B, 1,500 for C, 1,000 for D, and 250 for E, right? So, floor space, if you check, you see A is 2,000, D is also 2,000, 2,500, 3,000 and 500, right? So, if you add this, suppose if you add this, so it will be how much? 4,500 plus 3,000, that is 7,500, 10,000, right? So, total is 10,000, okay? And it is for A, it is 2,000. And what is the rent? Rent is 5,000. So, for this, for A, floor space will be how much? I can write like this: 10,000, 5,000 divided by 10,000 into 2,000. 2,000 is the area, right? So, it will be how much? It will be is equal to 1,000. So, that is how it is coming 1,000, right? Okay. Similarly, for C, for example, B you can do, right? I am showing C, for example. So, C, you see, for C, what is the floor area? For C, the floor area is 3,000, right? So, I can write like this, I can calculate it like this: 5,000 divided by 10,000 into 3,000. So, if you solve this, it is 1,500. So, here also you see it is 1,500. So, like this for other figures also, like this one, for this entire table, right? For this entire table, we can calculate the values like this, right? Now, you see here, this part belongs to production department up to this point. This is fine, right? But this part, this is for service department. Now, this service department figures we can reallocate, right? We can reallocate, like for example, the total I can divide it into terms of this ratio. From where I am getting this ratio? I am getting this ratio from here, right? I am getting this ratio from here and I am dividing it, right? This figure. So, 4625, right? 4625, you see the total overhead is 4625 here, This 4625 I am further reallocating on the base to the service between 3 production departments, that is A, B and C, in the ratio of 3:1:1. 3:1:1, right? Okay. And similarly, for the E, what is the total overhead? 1575. You see the same figure here, 1575. This I am allocating on the basis of 2:2:1. Now, if I do this, you see this is becoming nil, this is becoming nil, and here we are getting the total value of the overheads allocated to the 3 production departments, that is A, B and C, right. So, this is the way of allocating and apportioning the overheads. Now, we can, now you see this is one way of doing it. The other way is that how to show the redistribution of overhead. The service department D renders service to E worth 2000 and balance to A, B and C in the ratio of 3:1:1. While service department E provides service only to A, B and C at 2:2:1. In this case, the redistribution will be as under. Suppose this is another case where it is D is rendering service to E, right, of 2000, right. Then what I can do, I can further redistribute it, right. This production department, this one, so total is 3575. If I add this to this plus this, right, this 3575 again I am redistributing here in the ratio of 2:2:1, and this total overhead in the department D I am reallocating to the production department in 3:1:1. Okay. So, if I add, I will get how much? I will get this. Is it okay? Right. So, I am again recapitulating the whole thing. What is overhead? Overhead is the sum of all the indirect costs, indirect material, indirect labor and indirect expenses that is incurred by a company. Now, this indirect costs we can classify on the basis of function, like we can classify as manufacturing overhead or factory overhead, on administrative overhead, the sales and distribution overhead and research and development overhead. Also, this can be classified on the basis of their behavior, like we can classify it as fixed overhead, as variable overhead and semi-variable overhead, right. Now, once our ultimate objective is to calculate the cost per unit, right. So, for calculating the cost per unit, right, what we need to do? We need to allocate and apportion the overheads. So, if a particular overhead is linked to a cost center, then it is easier to be done. But if it is not directly, if it is not directly linked to the production department, say service department for example, then we need to apportion first, right, and then we need to reapportion it to find out, to allocate the costs and find out the cost per unit. This involves some amount of subjectivity, right. There are various methods for it and we discuss those methods today, and our objective is to reach to the closest possible, right, to the actual cost incurred for producing a particular unit, because the determination of the right cost is very, very important from the point of view of managerial decision making. Thank you. Here is one more this thing, that if you need to do the repeated distribution, right, then also you can do this. Like for example, we have arrived at the final figure here, and then we can do a repeated distribution method till it becomes nil. So you see here the total overhead is 4625 and it is 1575. So this one is distributed in the ratio of 2:3:4:1, right. So here it becomes nil, but again this the department E got 462. this 462 needs to be further redistributed, right? So this process should continue till the amount left becomes negligible, right? This becomes nil, right? So ultimately the total overhead allocation for the 3 production departments is 9339, 9061 and 12,200. Thank you.